picture this scene for a second.
Mhm.
Air Force One is touching down on the tarmac in Beijing.
Right.
It is the first visit to the Chinese capital by an American president in like 9 long years. The doors open, the president steps out, and flanking him is just an absolute powerhouse of American industry.
Yeah, the visual is striking.
You are looking at 17 of the most powerful CEOs on the planet walking down those stairs. You have Elon Musk, you have Tim Cook, you have the head of NVIDIA.
Right.
To the untrained eye, or to anyone just catching a 10-second clip on the evening news, this visual is a massive, undeniable projection of American strength.
It looks exactly like an empire arriving to dictate terms to a rival. The optics of bringing that much corporate firepower on a diplomatic trip are entirely designed to project dominance.
But today, we're going to look past that political theater. We're looking past the carefully curated photo ops.
Exactly, because the reality is quite different.
Right. And to do that, we're pulling from a massive stack of sources for this deep dive today. We've got everything from raw intelligence reports and geopolitical analysis to international broadcast transcripts.
Spanning Fox News to Sky News Australia.
Yeah, exactly. Plus a whole range of independent expert analysis. And I want to pause right here and say directly to you, the listener, we are strictly impartial here.
Absolutely.
Because some of these sources have very different political slants, right? Left wing, right wing.
Yeah.
We do not endorse any of these viewpoints or take any sides.
Yeah.
We are just here to report on what the material actually says.
Just sticking to the facts of the deep dive.
Right. And our mission today is to figure out the actual on-the-ground balance of power in that room in Beijing. Because the truth, buried in these documents, is that the power map looks absolutely nothing like what most people assume.
No, it doesn't. If you want to understand the underlying architecture of the summit, you have to look at it through a very specific historical framework.
Okay.
Geopolitical analysts and our sources are referring to this current dynamic as an inverted opium war.
The Inverted Opium War. Okay, well, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because I want to make sure we ground that concept before we go any further.
Sure.
The original opium wars were, well, they were about forced entry, right?
Yes. So, in the 19th century, Britain used overwhelming naval and military might to literally force open Chinese markets.
Right.
They were the dominant imperial power demanding access to sell their goods, and they basically used gunboats to make it happen.
Wow.
And today,
the logic and the leverage have completely flipped. The inversion is structural. China now holds the financial leverage, the industrial leverage, and the massive manufacturing capacity.
so America is the one arriving in Beijing with a desperate shopping list.
Exactly.
And this is where I want to talk directly to you, the listener, again, because this isn't just about high-level, closed-door diplomacy that only matters to people in Washington.
It affects everyone.
It really does. The outcome of this single summit in Beijing has a direct, immediate line to what you are paying at the gas pump today.
It connects to the interest rate on your mortgage next year and just the basic security of the global economy you rely on. So let's start by dismantling the grand illusion of this whole summit, trade.
Right, the trade deficit.
For 2 administrations now, we've seen escalating tariffs up to, 145% in some cases?
Yeah, 145%.
The entire public narrative has been about punishing China, bringing manufacturing back to the States, and negotiating from this unshakable position of economic strength.
But the macroeconomic reality documented in the trade data tells a completely different story.
I mean, it has to, right?
Yeah. Despite 2 administrations implementing those massive tariffs, the U.S. goods trade deficit with China hit a record $279 billion in 2024.
Wait, really?
Yes, that is the largest bilateral trade deficit the United States has ever recorded with a single country in history.
Okay, I need you to explain the math on that to me. If we put a 145% tax on imported goods to make them prohibitively expensive, people are supposed to stop buying them.
Right, theoretically.
So how does the deficit hit a record high when we are actively trying to choke off the trade?
Because the tariffs didn't actually bring production back to factory towns in Ohio or Pennsylvania.
Okay.
They just altered the global logistics map. Instead of shipping a container directly from a factory in Shenzhen to a port in Los Angeles, those Chinese goods are now flowing through third-party countries.
Oh, wow. So they're just taking a detour.
Exactly. They get shipped to Vietnam, or they get routed through Mexico, they get a new label, and then they cross the U.S. border.
Sneaky.
The fundamental dependency on Chinese manufacturing wasn't unwound at all. It was just rerouted through a much more convoluted system.
It's like trying to block a massive rushing river by dropping a boulder in the middle of it.
That's a great way to look at it.
The water doesn't just stop flowing. It simply finds a slightly longer, much more expensive way around the boulder to get to the exact same destination at the bottom of the valley. Only now, the water costs more. So thinking about those 17 CEOs walking off Air Force One, they aren't there as a show of force at all, are they?
No, not at all. What's fascinating here is their presence is actually a stark measurement of structural dependency.
Wow.
They aren't an invading economic army. They're deeply entangled participants in the Chinese manufacturing ecosystem.
So they're basically showing up hat in hand.
The U.S. delegation is arriving at the creditor's table. And that transition from broad economic reliance to acute critical vulnerability is where this situation moves from a simple trade dispute into a massive national security paradox.
Because general consumer goods are one thing. Like if an iPhone or a flat-screen TV gets 20% more expensive because it had to take a detour through Mexico, that is incredibly annoying for you, the consumer.
Right, it's inflation.
But national security is a completely different ballgame. And that is what our sources highlight next, the actual tangible weapons China holds in this negotiation.
The kill switches.
Exactly. We're referring to these as kill switches. And kill switch number one is something most people don't think about until the supply chain completely freezes. Rare earth minerals.
Right. This is the invisible bottleneck of the modern technological world. China currently controls over 90% of global rare earth processing.
Over 90%. That's insane.
It gets worse. The intelligence reports get much more specific and much more alarming than that overall percentage.
Okay, lay it on me.
China controls nearly 100% of the processing for two very specific elements, dysprosium and terbium.
Dysprosium and terbium. Okay, I know these materials go into electronics, but what specifically makes those two elements so critical that they give Beijing leverage over Washington?
It comes down to metallurgy and extreme environments. Dysprosium and terbium are incredibly heat-resistant magnetic materials.
Okay.
They're absolutely critical for advanced U.S. weapon systems to function. They are built into the precision guidance systems of modern munitions.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And they are essential for the engines of the F-35 fighter jets to operate at high temperatures without the magnets failing.
So our best jets rely on them.
Absolutely. And they are the foundational materials required for the proposed $1.2 trillion Golden Dome missile defense system the U.S. is trying to build.
Wait, $1.2 trillion?
Yes. And here's the kicker. In April 2025, just before this summit took place, China instituted strict export controls on these exact elements.
See, here's where it gets really interesting. Because we are essentially trying to build a $1.2 trillion state-of-the-art security system for our house.
Yep.
But the person we are trying to keep off the property is the only manufacturer on planet Earth who makes the highly specific batteries required to run the alarm.
That is the exact paradox.
It is an absolute paradox. How can you credibly threaten a rival nation when their processed minerals are literally guiding your missiles?
Well, you can't. The $1.2 trillion price tag for the Golden Dome is purely theoretical if the physical supply chain required to build it does not exist outside of Chinese borders.
Which it doesn't.
Right. The U.S. simply cannot manufacture its way out of that bottleneck in the short term.
Okay, so that's rare earths.
Right. And that dynamic of intertwined defense and commercial interests brings up kill switch number 2, which involves a company sitting right in Everett, Washington, Boeing.
Wait, Boeing? I mean, Boeing primarily makes commercial passenger planes. Why is a massive commercial airline order being treated in these intelligence briefings like a piece of Pentagon strategy?
It comes down to how factory floors and aerospace economics actually work. Chinese airlines are currently facing a massive fleet replacement cycle.
Okay.
Over the next 15 years, they need over 1,200 new narrow-body aircraft. You know, those are the single-aisle passenger jets you typically fly on for domestic routes.
Right, the standard workhorses.
Exactly. It is the largest commercial aviation replacement cycle in history. And right now, hovering over this entire summit, is a potential 500-jet order from China.
I still don't see the national security link, though.
Yeah.
I mean, that just sounds like a massive payday for a U.S. corporation.
The link is shared overhead. Boeing isn't just a commercial company. They are a prime defense contractor.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, that massive commercial airline order provides the volume required to keep Boeing's production lines running efficiently and cost-effectively.
Okay.
That commercial volume absorbs the massive overhead costs of the factories, which in turn keeps the Pentagon's KC-46 military tanker pipeline viable.
Wow. So without the commercial jets,
If Boeing loses that 500-jet order, The cost per unit to manufacture the military planes skyrockets, and the defense supply chain becomes incredibly fragile.
And I'm guessing Beijing knows this,
Oh, Beijing understands this factory floor math perfectly. They know the timing of this commercial order dictates U.S. military production efficiency.
which transforms a simple business deal into a precision diplomatic weapon.
Exactly.
Man. Okay, but if they have us cornered on rare earths for our missiles and commercial orders for our military aerospace industry, those still feel like long-term structural levers.
They are.
They take years to play out.
Yeah.
But there is a literal fire burning right now that the U.S. president desperately needs to put out on this trip.
Yes, there is.
And that is kill switch number 3, the global oil choke point and the Strait of Hormuz.
This is by far the most immediate crisis on the table. To understand why it's dominating the agenda, we have to rewind slightly to February 28th.
Right, to the joint U.S. and Israeli military operation against Iran.
Operation Epic Fury.
Right, Operation Epic Fury.
Right.
Which clearly triggered some unintended consequences.
Massive blowback. Iran retaliated by shutting down the Strait of Hormuz.
Which is a huge deal.
Unprecedented. For context, roughly 20% of the world's total oil supply, we're talking about 17 million barrels a day, flows through that one narrow waterway.
And by laying mines or threatening shipping there, Iran engineered a massive, instantaneous energy shock.
Exactly. Brent crude oil spiked 44% to $140 a barrel almost overnight.
And the average consumer felt that instantly. U.S. gasoline hit $4.50 a gallon.
Diesel fuel was up 61%.
This military operation was supposed to be a contained 4 to 6 week mission. And suddenly the entire global economy is paying for it every time they fill up their cars.
Yep.
But where does China actually fit into this Middle Eastern conflict? Why fly to Beijing to solve a problem with Tehran?
Because China buys approximately 90% of Iran's oil exports.
90%.
Yeah. That amounts to roughly 1.38 million barrels per day. China is the singular economic lifeline keeping the Iranian government financially functional under crushing U.S. sanctions.
Right.
Because Beijing is their biggest and really their only major customer, they are the only entity on the planet with the actual economic leverage to pressure Tehran to reopen the strait.
So Washington can't do it.
Washington can't do it. Europe can't do it. Only Beijing can pick up the phone and make that demand.
This is where our sources reveal an absolutely staggering twist involving Russia. And I need to make sure I'm understanding this correctly.
Go for it.
To ease this massive global oil shock and keep the global economy from cratering, the U.S. Treasury quietly issued something called General License 134B.
Yes.
What exactly is that?
In plain English, General License 134B is a temporary easing of sanctions.
Sanctions on Russia.
Yes. The U.S. essentially looked the other way to allow Russian oil to keep flowing freely to Asian markets.
Specifically to places like India that were suddenly facing massive energy shortages due to the Hormuz closure.
Exactly.
Okay, let the absurdity of this geopolitical paradox land for a second.
That's wild.
We are essentially funding Russia's war chest jet, putting an estimated extra $150 million a day into the Kremlin's coffers, just to cushion the economic blow of our own conflict with Iran.
That is what the sources indicate.
And at the exact same time, the U.S. let Iran's own oil export waiver expire. How on earth is Tehran reacting to this double game where the U.S. is squeezing them but quietly lifting the gates from Moscow?
Well, Iran is absolutely furious, as you would expect. They see Washington using Russian oil as an economic weapon against them, while publicly pretending to negotiate a peaceful resolution.
I mean, you can't blame them for seeing it that way.
And Iran has taken this grievance directly to their biggest customer. Just days before the U.S. president arrived for this summit, Iran's ambassador to China issued a highly public warning to Beijing.
What did he say?
The message was essentially, do not let America buy your cooperation against us.
And Beijing has to be loving this. They're literally hosting the anti-Washington axis in their own capital.
They absolutely are.
I mean, Iran's foreign minister was in Beijing making his case just before the U.S. president landed, and Vladimir Putin is scheduled to arrive in China right after the U.S. delegation leaves.
It is a masterclass in geopolitical positioning. Beijing is signaling to the world that they are the indispensable broker for global stability.
Right.
And the critical difference between the U.S. and China right now is pain tolerance. China's oil imports certainly dropped because of the Hormuz closure, but they have massive strategic reserves built up. They can afford to sit back and wait this out.
But the U.S. can't.
No. The U.S. administration does not have that luxury. They are operating against a brutal, ticking clock.
And that ticking clock is domestic politics. We are less than 6 months away from the 2026 U.S. midterm elections.
Exactly.
You have sky-high gas prices, and a Middle Eastern conflict that was promised to be wrapped up in a month is now dragging into its 11th week.
It's a disaster for incumbents.
That is an absolute nightmare scenario for domestic approval ratings.
Yeah.
The U.S. administration needs to get a deal done immediately to stabilize global oil markets before voters head to the polls in November.
And that rigid domestic political timeline has caused a historic rupture between the United States and Israel.
Because they want different things.
Right, because Prime Minister Netanyahu is operating on a completely different clock with completely different objectives.
It's like two people stuck on a tense road trip.
Oh, I like this analogy.
The driver, the U.S., is facing a hard deadline, watching the gas gauge hit empty, and wants to pull over immediately at the very first gas station they see, no matter how sketchy it is or what the gas costs, just to stabilize the situation.
Right.
But the passenger, Israel, wants to keep driving straight through the desert until they can pull into a garage and completely rebuild the car's engine from scratch.
They have fundamentally incompatible goals for this journey.
Totally.
Netanyahu has been explicit in public statements. He says the war is, quote, not over. He wants absolutely no sunset clauses in any negotiated deal.
Meaning he doesn't want an expiration date on the restrictions placed on Iran.
Exactly. He is demanding the total removal of Iran's enriched uranium, the complete dismantling of their nuclear sites, and the elimination of their proxy networks across the region.
So he does not want a temporary stabilization deal to lower gas prices. He wants a permanent transformation of Middle Eastern security.
Yes. But the U.S. president is actively bypassing him to get this Hormuz crisis over with.
Wait, bypassing him?
The friction is entirely out in the open now. The U.S. secured a ceasefire in Yemen without seeking Israeli input.
Wow.
The administration lifted Syrian sanctions without consulting Jerusalem. And according to the reports, the U.S. president had to tell Israel directly on a phone call to stop leaking military plans to the press.
The stakes here are massive.
Huge.
If the U.S. secures a deal in Beijing just to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and get domestic gas prices down, but leaves Iran's nuclear infrastructure intact in the process, it will mark a generational shift.
It really will.
Iran will have successfully proven it can go to a shooting war with the U.S. and Israel, shut down global energy markets, and still survive with its nuclear program intact.
That's the reality on the table.
So the U.S. is desperate for a deal to avoid an electoral disaster.
Right.
But if you're the desperate party at the negotiating table, you have to offer something massive in return.
Right.
Which brings us back to the room in Beijing and kill switch number 4. We've talked about rare earth minerals, we've talked about Boeing's factory floors, and we've talked about Iranian oil.
So what's left?
The fourth kill switch is U.S. Treasuries. China currently holds $759 billion in U.S. debt.
It is arguably the most massive financial weapon in the global economy.
But I have to push back on this idea that it's a usable weapon. Isn't weaponizing debt just mutually assured destruction?
That's the traditional thinking.
Right, because if China suddenly dumps $750 billion of our debt onto the open market, yes, it spikes U.S. interest rates and hurts our economy, but they simultaneously destroy the value of their own assets in the process.
Right.
It's a suicide pact. Why would Beijing ever actually pull that trigger?
This raises an important question, and it is one of the most underreported financial stories of the decade.
Okay, tell me.
It used to be a suicide pact, but China has engaged in what financial analysts call a quiet exit.
A quiet exit?
They haven't been dumping bonds in a massive fire sale. They've just been letting them mature and choosing not to reinvest.
Oh, wow.
Since their peak holdings in 2013, Beijing has slowly, deliberately shed over $300 billion in U.S. debt.
$300 billion?
Yes. They have been quietly repositioning their assets into gold and other commodities for over a decade to build financial maneuverability.
That is so smart.
It is no longer the mutually assured destruction scenario it was 10 years ago. They have insulated their own economy precisely so they can actually use that financial leverage if talks break down.
Wow. They systematically lowered their own blast radius.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've mapped out the leverage, but we cannot talk about the power dynamic in this room without talking about the wildest wild card sitting at that negotiating table.
Oh, absolutely. Elon Musk.
Elon Musk. He is sitting there as a senior U.S. government official acting as part of the American delegation.
Right.
But his personal wealth and his company's future are incredibly dependent on the very people sitting right across from him.
Heavily dependent. Let's look at the math for Tesla's Shanghai Gigafactory.
Okay.
They produced around 950,000 vehicles in 2024. That represents roughly 40% of Tesla's entire global output.
Almost half.
Yeah. And it's not just the assembly of the cars. Tesla relies heavily on Chinese suppliers. For instance, they are deeply tethered to CATL, which is the world's dominant manufacturer of EV batteries.
So Beijing holds ultimate regulatory authority over 40% of his company's global production.
Yes.
They could invent a regulatory violation and flick a switch to shut that factory down tomorrow.
They could.
The obvious question is Musk sitting at that table as a master back channel who understands the intricacies of the Chinese system better than any career diplomat, or is he America's most dangerous conflict of interest?
It is the defining tension of his presence in Beijing.
It really is.
When the U.S. delegation tries to push hard on rare earth export controls or the status of Taiwan, does the Chinese delegation just look at Musk across the table and smile, knowing exactly how much leverage they hold over his personal net worth and his company's supply chain?
Right. It's a crazy dynamic. So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've traced the mechanics of the trade deficit, the metallurgy inside our missiles, the oil flowing through Hormuz, the ticking clock of the elections, and the quiet exit from U.S. debt.
It's a lot of moving parts.
It is. Why should you care about the outcome of a meeting happening 7,000 miles away? Because if these talks break down, those 145% tariffs snap back into place immediately.
Instantly.
That means global logistics chains freeze and inflation spikes. Oil could easily blow past $120 a barrel again, and the dollar weakens as interest rates become volatile. You will feel the failure of this summit in your weekly grocery bill, and you will feel it in the interest rate on your mortgage.
Looking at the intelligence and the historical precedents we discussed today, there are really only a few ways this ends.
Let's hear the scenarios.
The ideal outcome would be a meaningful, comprehensive deal. Tariffs roll back, China commits to reopening the rare earth supply chain, the Boeing order gets confirmed, and Beijing successfully pressures Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz.
That sounds like a fantasy.
Oil drops back to $85 and global markets stabilize.
Right, but based on the fundamental incompatibilities we've discussed, that seems highly unlikely.
It is highly unlikely. Neither side is willing or able to concede that much domestic ground.
So what's the worst-case scenario?
On the other extreme, you have a complete breakdown. The talks collapse over a hard red line, most likely involving Taiwan or the nuances of Iran's nuclear program.
The probability of that is low, but the fallout would be catastrophic for the global economy.
Exactly. Which leaves us with the messy middle ground.
The most likely result.
The most likely result is a stability handshake. Both sides will walk out of the room, claim a massive diplomatic victory to their respective domestic audiences, and use incredibly vague framework language in their press releases.
Kick the can down the road.
Ultimately, they will defer all the real structural problems. They will keep the Boeing order pending as leverage. They will ensure just enough oil flows to prevent a recession. And they will pretend the Inverted Opium War isn't fundamentally changing the world order.
A handshake that simply hides the hostage situation. Which leaves me with a final thought I want you to mull over after this deep dive ends.
Yeah, let's hear it.
We've spent the last 20 minutes detailing how this inverted opium war proves the world is currently held together by these massive, tangled economic dependencies. Our cutting-edge missiles absolutely need their rare earth processing, and their sprawling factory cities desperately need our consumers to buy their goods.
Mutually assured economic destruction.
Right. But what happens a decade from now if America actually succeeds in its stated goal of decoupling? What if we actually manage to rebuild the industrial base and bring all that critical manufacturing home?
That's a fascinating question.
Without that mutual financial hostage situation, keeping both sides glued to the negotiating table out of sheer economic terror, does a traditional military war actually become more likely? It's something to think about.
A chilling thought, but an absolutely essential question to ask as the power mat shifts.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden leverage mapping our world. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening.